proper to operate in London due to concerns which have, they say, public safety and security implications. Uber are going to appeal. That's a very long drawn-out process, so actually we won't see Ubers off the roads for a long time. But of course there are implications for across the entire country for this. 40 different cities and towns in the UK use Ubers. John Cooper, what do you make of this decision by the Mayor of London and TfL?
Well, I was surprised about it, but not as surprised as my driver coming in today.
Your Uber driver?
My Uber driver, who had me as a captive audience for half an hour or so, briefing me up for today, effectively. I mean, the thing is this, it's a significant decision. Uber allows people to order taxis, as we know, to pay for them over their mobile phones, and about 3.5 million passengers and 40,000 drivers use the Uber app in London. So this is going to have a significant effect upon them. And it's going to drag on. I don't think listeners should think all of a sudden Uber are going to disappear from London. I would anticipate, in fact, I put money on it, they've already put the appeal papers in.
Oh, they've already announced that they are going to appeal, no question.
Without any doubt whatsoever, and that's going to drag on. So nothing is going to happen very quickly at all. The only thing I'd say is this: there's very little information coming out at the moment, apart from the fact that TfL are saying it's public safety and security implications. And then opponents of the firm say, for instance, the firm and the operation of the cars causes gridlocks. I have to say to you now, Julia, again on my journey in today, the gridlocks aren't being caused by Uber. They're
caused by the cycle superhighways.
And roadworks that are not being attended
to. Exactly. Well, let's come to you now, Gerard Batten. There's been some criticism already from some free marketeers, and certainly the Uber have said, look, this is basically about limiting consumer choice. Is that how you see this?
Well, you've got to have some competition, certainly, and you can't avoid the advance of technology. But on the other hand, black cabs are very highly regulated. You have to qualify. You have to know what you're doing. You're under scrutiny, and the TfL set the cab fares, as we were discussing earlier.
And which car you can use.
Yes, but the Uber drivers, as we've known, not enough scrutiny, not enough safeguards. I'll give you an anecdotal story. It wasn't Uber I was in, but I was in one of a nationally known car company that send out drivers to take people away from interviews like this. And the driver told me that what a common practice was, they get paid more for doing a longer shift. So the driver goes off, he gives the car over to one of his friends who isn't insured, hasn't got a licence, driving under a false name. And I said, well, what if they have a crash? They're uninsured. He said, they don't worry about that, because these people are very often migrants into the country anyway. Very difficult to trace them if something goes wrong.
He's from UKIP. You already managed to get migration in. It's only 9 minutes past
I was waiting for that.
I'm telling you what.
That's one of your concerns. But do you think Uber is a good thing or a bad thing? Is this just how the market's going to move, Gerard? This is the future.
Well, I think that, as I said, I personally haven't used them because I'm lousy with technology, so I prefer to I get a black cab or phone a minicab firm, a local one. But I know people use it. I know people that use it because it's convenient. But it has to be regulated. You have to be sure that you've got a competent driver who's got insurance, who hasn't got a criminal record.
This seems to me, why can't they not just be vetted in the same way that black cab drivers? Well, although that said, I have to say, I do think there's nonsense that black cab drivers have the knowledge and do a 3-year exam. We've got sat navs now. I really just people know the postcode of where they're going.
I think it is important. I think the important thing about this is, whatever the issues are right or wrong about Uber, and I think more will come out as we go on here. It's a statement, I think, that certain standards have to be adhered to as far as public safety is concerned. I have to say, though, I think it's a bit low to bring immigration in on this one. The fact of the matter is, safety is safety is safety. That's nothing to do with race.
I've had some.
I didn't say it was. I don't think it's immigration, actually.
I've had some fascinating conversations with people from around Europe who have had to come here to be cab drivers. A fascinating conversation. One was with a Romanian who actually saved up a load of money, went home and opened a business, then couldn't operate because of the local mafia. They put him out of business. Had to come back here and drive cabs again. You learn an awful lot in a cab.
Anecdotally.
It's the only time politicians ever speak to ordinary people. Anyway, John Cooper and Gerard Batten, let's move on to what we thought would definitely be the big story of the day. It's been the biggest story of the week. My God, I'm just up to my ears in talking about this speech without having heard the speech. Theresa May, the Prime Minister, in just over 2 hours' time, is going to be speaking in Florence. She's going to have her senior cabinet ministers next to her when she speaks, and it's going to be this big announcement on Brexit, perhaps a new conciliatory bid to break this deadlock with a 2-year transition period, €20 billion or £20 billion. The figure seems to have changed depending which outlet let you hear, over those 2 years to sort of tide over the EU budget and some offers on the UK citizenship. I suppose I should come to you on this first, Gerard. Do you think that what she's offering is, A, the right thing to offer, and B, is it going to be enough?
Have we only got an hour on this? I don't think she's strong enough to do this. She doesn't really want to do it anyway because she was an arch Remainer in the campaign.
She wasn't an arch Remainer. She wasn't. She was
going around with a big board saying, I'm a Remainer.
Even during the campaign, Theresa May did say quite clearly she didn't think it would be a disaster if we did leave, which is downside different from what Charles
I think what
was
she
saying.
is a political operator. She's not a statesperson. I mean, she's going to a certain extent, she'll go along which way the wind's blowing, and now she's got the job of trying to make this happen. She doesn't really want to do it. She isn't strong enough for it. She isn't brave enough for it, and she's got an army of quislings and collaborators behind her who don't want it to happen anyway. So if you want, I can go through the details of what she's offering. It's a disaster. It's totally the wrong way to go about it. You can't negotiate your way out of something with people who don't want you to leave anyway.
Well, they do want us out now,
no,
don't they? No, they want our money, and they want us to...
What this whole thing is about is about arriving at some kind of withdrawal agreement where you actually... as in as much as out, where we still pay them the money. Mrs May is going to score because if she gets rid of the UK MEP, she gets rid of the UKIP electoral threat. So I think that's on their agenda as well, so we don't have any more MEPs. But we'll still pay them money. And what I think...
With all due respect, is there still a UKIP threat?
There would be if there was another European election. I can tell you that. We'd come top of the poll.
I suppose, yes.
And what we're going to end up, as I say, with this situation where we're half in and half out, and they're delaying. I wrote a book about this, published it 3 years ago, and I said even if it happens, you will see that they will delay and delay up until the time of the next election when they'll try and reverse the decision, and that's what they're doing.
I'll come to John now, and then Gerard, I want to come back to if UKIP were doing these negotiations, what you would do. But John, what do you make of this speech? Do you think it's going to be the sort of have the right conciliatory tone?
Well, I was listening to what Gerard was saying. For the first tranche of what he was saying, I was agreeing with everything he was saying. Theresa May, a broken leader. Theresa May, no authority. Theresa May, you can't trust her. Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I'm not
Tory. And funnily enough, neither am I. And so, as far as that's concerned, it's coming out of the mouth of a broken vessel. She's, I think, dead woman walking was one of the expressions used. But putting to one side Theresa May and putting to one side her broken cabinet and putting to one side the appalling state the Tories are in, I think a transitional, you'll not be surprised to hear me say that I disagree with Gerard on this, I think a transitional period, given the position we're in now, is important, and it's important, if nothing else, for a degree of certainty for business. In reality, I'm sure people would have liked a more clean-cut approch and a more clean-cut
But we only
end,
get a transitional period if we get... So there does seem to be an awful lot of emphasis, John, on what the transitional period will be when we leave the EU to the new situation we're in. There doesn't seem to be much focus on what the new relationship will be.
It's an absolute mess. I accept that. We're in a total mess, and I say, again, looking back to a history of a few years ago, we shouldn't be in this mess. The only reason we're here is because David Cameron called this referendum on Brexit to shore up the Tory party.
Well, the only reason we're in it is because the British people voted in a democratic referendum.
No, the reason we're in it is because Cameron actually called a referendum which we didn't need to save his neck and the Tory party.
We didn't need to have, because the entire establishment and political elites of this country were against it, because we're the stupid, ignorant, racist, xenophobic, uneducated little people who don't know what we're doing, and you shouldn't have a say. That's what you're saying, John.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is not necessary. But I'm also
not
saying...
Not necessary to have democratic decisions.
I'm actually agreeing with what Ed Miliband said, you'll be pleased to know. Another favourite of yours, Julia. I'm agreeing with what Ed Miliband said during, I think it was the 2015 election, was it? God, there's so many elections. I lose track. But he was asked about whether he would have a referendum, and he said no, it would be destructive of stability in this country.
Change can make for instability. Gerard, let's come back to you on this. If the UKIP were, in government, if UKIP were making a decision about how to go into these negotiations, what would your starting point be, and what do you think you'd get?
Right, well, I did offer my services to Mrs May when I was on a platform with her in the general election, and she hasn't taken me up. I'd
have loved to have seen her face.
Let me summarise for you. First of all, we've spent 44 years now being absorbed into this thing with, according to the EU's own website, about 172,000 bits of legislation, if you count every jot and tittle. You cannot negotiate your way out of this in 2 years, but you have to make a decision to leave. Now, what I've laid out in my plan, which I've got there...
Now, we've only got about a couple of minutes.
Yes, I realise that.
Can't do the full manifesto.
Let me summarise it for you very quickly. First of all, what Parliament should do is to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act as a first step, not a last step. Then we've left under our law. All EU law would remain in place because it's acts of Parliament and regulations which have been incorporated, and a repeal bill could include that, and Bill Cash actually drafted a repeal bill that says all that. Then you go to the EU and said, we've left under our law. Everything's going to stay the same for the moment. Nothing, there won't be any chaos. But we are now going to repeal and amend according to our priorities and in our timescale. And the first thing we're going to do is offer you continued tariff-free trade. Take it or leave it. You've got a week to think about it. You can either continue on the terms we have now, and they've got 58 trade agreements with other countries around the world. They could do this very quickly if they wanted to. Or we're going to go on WTO terms. When we've done that, next week we're going to sort out the situation regarding the EU nationals here and our nationals there, and then we'll start to look at other things. And
there's no issue for you about cliff edges. In fact,
we are being led up the garden path with these false premises about falling off a cliff or the need for a deal. We are arguing on their terms, and their terms are they'd rather we didn't leave anyway. So what we really should do is to think about how we want it to work, and that would happen if we had a patriotic Prime Minister, Government and Parliament, which we haven't got. So I can only tell you how it's going to be done, and if we were really going to do it, we would have started this the day after the referendum.
I was going to say, John, last word on this one, because you're up against two levers.
No, and I think one of the problems here, trying to be as neutral as I can on the issue, is that where UKIP have clearly got a thought-out approach, which I disagree with, but I respect that it's thought out, Theresa May has no thought-out approach. And when you actually look at what we're learning here of what she's going to say, it's all platitudes. It's all words. It's just guff. And so whether you're a Remainer, a Ramona, or simply want to get out and get rid of it, is irrelevant for the purposes of this discussion. The fact is, Theresa May is not up to the job.
Yes, I agree with that.
Well, we've got some agreement on the panel. Coming up, we're going to talk about some of the international events. There's a horrific Hurricane Maria.
Can I make one point?
Yes,
very quick point. And John will be interested in this as a lawyer. If she offers the money in order to arrive at a political solution, she'll be breaking the Bribery Act 2010.
Gentlemen, shush!
Oh, go on, let me answer that.
We're going to talk about Hurricane Maria in Mexico. I'm just going to shush them. We're going to come back in a few minutes, talk about Ryanair as well. This is Talk Radio. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. My fabulous Friday panel. We're just as lively off-air as on air. I have to shush them just to get us back on edge. Gerard Batten is the UKIP MEP for London, their Brexit spokesman. John Cooper is a QC at 25 Bedford Row. Very lively debates so far on Uber and indeed on Brexit. But let's turn our attention to events further afield, and that's the horrific, disasters we've seen. Hurricane Maria sweeping through the Caribbean just closely after Hurricane Irma, and also that devastating earthquake in Mexico. The death toll still rising there after that school collapse with dozens of children trapped inside. John, let me come to you first on this. We've seen the spate of these natural disasters, and it's incredibly distressing to watch. And it does feel a little bit end of times at the moment. They're dominating the news cycle. You
know, it's frightening. Taking the two stories together, if I can, Mexico and Hurricane Maria. Looking at Mexico first, the one thing that's impressed me about the Mexico thing is how organised Mexico seems to be. In dealing with these tragedies, not only the emergency services but also civilians as well. I saw a piece recently about civilians on motor scooters, for instance, mobilising immediately, picking up emergency resources and taking them directly to where they were needed.
Although some big issues over building regulations. Again, a country where there is a level of corruption, which means that buildings don't get built to the safe levels, which means that children die in earthquakes.
Actually, I did see a very interesting TV programme a while back in which they were talking about building earthquake-resistant buildings. I'm sure it was in Mexico City, and there's a lot of technology. And in fact, on the news yesterday, they showed a building where the side of the building, the cladding fell off, but the actual building stayed steady. So it can be done, but difficult to do it in a country that's as corrupt as Mexico, as you say, with its its drug barren culture.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the issues, isn't it? And again, also still ongoing criticism of the British action to help the British citizens and who are still facing troubles in the Caribbean post Hurricane Irma, not even Hurricane Maria as well.
Well, to do things like that, you have to have a navy with sufficient ships and personnel to go down and do it. And on the one hand, you've got all the lefties who don't want us that hate all our imperial past and want to dismantle.
John, I think he's
dismantle
talking
it.
about you.
But then they expect,
I'm not rising to it.
Then they expect us to have gunboats to go down there and actually do humanitarian work when you need it. And I think we do need a much stronger navy. It's in ridiculous levels of weakness now because of the cuts that have been made.
Well, a typical UKIP trying to turn a tragedy like this into a political comment about
off again.
Leftist politicians. This has got absolutely nothing to do with politics. Again, not particularly party politics,
Yes,
because the reality is we shouldn't be making party political points. I think it's a bit distasteful to make party political points over a tragedy such as this. We want to make sure they get the best that possible. Yes, there has been a lack of. Accept that there has been a lack of expenditure on military. I accept that as well, but that's a cross-party thing. The reality is that we need to be doing more. We need to be doing more for the area, and we need to give them support, and we should make sure that our support was in place far quicker than it was. Again, looking back, it's a lack of response. Grenfell was the same. So to bring something.
Obviously, you're involved. Regular listeners will know, involved in that inquiry.
Yeah, well, I'm very much immersed in the Grenfell tragedy, and one of the issues there that will arise is the lack of immediate response, and this seems to be a trend which is running through, particularly this government at the moment, not really being able to respond quickly, urgently and effectively. And look, we live in an age now where meteorological information predicts these things, sometimes days in advance. OK, Grenfell couldn't... Well, Grenfell could have been predicted. Yes, it could have been predicted, but as far as the weather overseas is concerned, with the hurricanes, for instance, that definitely could have been predicted, and still we're playing catch-up. I think that is the disgrace of it, and that's not a party political point.
Okay. Yeah, can I come back on this? Can we talk about and move on to another story? There's so many stories to get through. Ryanair, very, very much in the news this week over this extraordinary decision, what they made a mess of their pilot rotas, basically leaving them massively short of flight crew because of the change in the holiday rota calendar, which meant that basically all their pilots are off on holiday for September and October. Hundreds of thousands of passengers have had their travel plans affected. Ryanair, as always, have not been, should we say, upfront in offering compensation and offering alternatives, particularly not wanting to book people onto their alternative bucket airline like EasyJet. Come to you first on this, Gerard. I mean, Michael O'Leary gets a lot of grief, and he seems to somehow, I think I've met him, he seems to quite enjoy it. But there is a big issue here. If the pilots basically feel hard done by, don't have any urge to help Ryanair out, they're saying, you told us we can take leave, you use it or you lose it. They don't trust they're going to get this bonus. They want a better deal. Do you think this is the final sort of nail in, well, not nail in the coffin actually at all, because Ryanair is actually going from strength to strength, but is this the moment when Ryanair's had to face up to the fact that you can't treat both your crews, your staff and your customers like dirt and get away with it forever?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't fly on them, because you buy cheap, you buy twice, as their customers are now finding out.
I've flown them all the time. I've not had problems.
I've used it a bit once when I used to go to Strasbourg, and I would prefer to fly something a bit more reliable. People ended up being stranded at 10 o'clock at night in Karlsruhe Airport, it didn't happen to me, so I'd stopped doing it before it did. But what amused me about this was that Mr O'Leary came to the European Parliament, I think it was July, for the Transport Committee, and he sat there and he told us that we couldn't reach an agreement on the European skies thing, that he would actually be stopping all flights from the UK by the autumn of 2018. So I thought it was a little bit ironic that actually all the flights stopped because of his own problems with his company. In actual fact, we also had Willie Walsh there from IEA, who said, no, there's no problem, because all you do is you extend the agreement, which has got 37, I think, might be wrong about the number of European countries in it, a number of which are not in the EU, and all you do is extend the agreement and make Britain a non-EU member of the same agreement. So I think that Mr O'Leary is an avid fan of the EU. Maybe he should have a bit more attention to his business than politics.
John?
It's like one of those Christmas games, isn't it? How many times can you get the EU into it? Right, I'm determined.
I'm playing bingo, and I'm definitely winning.
I know we may be at a later stage talking about Olivia being a favourite girl's name. I'm going to get the EU into that. That's my challenge. But going back on this particular story, all I'll simply say is this: whatever the rights and wrongs of it, and I'm no ACAS negotiator, but if you want the best out of the people that are working for you, you don't say things like, well, if pilots misbehave, that'll be the end of their goodies.
That language, I have thought that was... I mean, his view with customers is very clear. Look, hey, if you don't like it, don't buy our cheap tickets. It's entirely up to you. Take it or leave it.
It's called diplomacy.
Yeah, but talking about your senior, highly trained professional staff like that is very disparaging.
Because the other thing I should say is this: I don't know. I don't fly, or I do, but I don't actually pilot. But what I would say is this: the pilots that I do know, and I know a couple, they say whether or not you're constantly hands on the steering wheel, as it were, it's when things go wrong. You've got to be trained to deal with them.
This is the absolute thing. Actually, you know, again, they might just be sitting there having a sandwich and a chat for most of the time. But when the proverbial hits the fan, you'd like them to be experienced to know what they're doing. Indeed. John Cooper, Gerard Batten, they're going to be continuing to review the week's biggest news stories as my Fabulous Friday panellists. Good afternoon to you. This is Talk Radio. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, heading up to 1 o'clock when John Holmes will be here to take you through the afternoon. Yeah, we've made it all the way to Friday, and of course it means that's my Fabulous Friday panel in the studio, and very fabulous they are being very lively, shall we say. Gerard Batten is a UKIP MEP for London and their Brexit spokesman. John Cooper is a QC at 25 Bedford Road. Well, we've talked about a lot of the big stories of today, in particular Uber, Brexit and the like, and other big stories. But let's talk about a story that actually probably would have got a lot more coverage, I think, in any other week without this Brexit speech looming, and indeed other events around the world in terms of these natural disasters. And that's Theresa May's big speech in New York this week to technology companies, basically warning them that they have to start removing extremist content from their sites. So she told the United Nations General Assembly, including world leaders, Facebook, Microsoft, Twitter, who were all there, that basically they need to take down that material within 2 hours or they'll face strict fines. John, I suppose it's obvious to come to you on this issue now. Is it about time that governments force these tech companies to act on this issue, or is there very little they can do?
I think it's a bit of a balance, Julia. I mean, it's right that this issue should be highlighted, and the tech companies haven't actually said they disagree with Theresa May on this. It's the reality of how quickly they can do it. For instance, they can already do it very quickly. YouTube apparently told the media recently that they received 200,000 reports of inappropriate content a day and managed to review 98% of them within 24 hours. Well, that's YouTube. There may be others that need to get their act together a little more efficiently. But the principle that Theresa May is propounding here is important. It must be, of course, part and parcel of a package. This isn't going to solve the problem. But, yeah, if there can be cooperation, if it can be done. But it's one thing saying it should be done, but it's the other thing saying that it can be done.
Yeah, but that's the thing, though, Gerard, isn't it? I mean, look, these internet companies are able to use all our information, everything we've Googled, everything we've liked on Facebook or whatever, and they're able to use that to sell us as commodities to their advertisers. They're able to find all this information. They know that I'm interested in buying clothes for a 10-year-old girl or things like that. You know, they get all this information. Are we really saying they can't come up with an algorithm to find terrorist propaganda and how to make a bomb?
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on here. First of all, who decides what's extremism? Who decides what's inappropriate content? And then allowing for the fact that that might be a reasonable judgment on somebody's part to do that. It can't be that difficult. The Red Chinese make sure that the political dissidents are not on the internet, but we don't seem to be able to do it with paedophiles and
well, that's because
and
they have
real
full-on
terrorists.
Censorship, don't they?
Well,
I mean,
what I'm saying is
it's a trade-off, isn't it?
Technically there must be a way of doing it, but it's a question of also what we don't want to see is a curtailment of genuine free speech, because who's going to be making those decisions about what's extreme?
Yes, indeed. And again, yes, what is unacceptable to the vast majority of people?
Well,
maybe
some is obvious, though. I mean, some of it, if you're how to make a bomb, for instance, it's pretty clear. And as far as the Red Chinese,
and it is actually it is an offence for you to look at it, and yet bizarrely, if you search that on the internet, it's an offence. And yet bizarrely, if you're hosting the website that's showing it, you're not committing an offence.
The internet's a bit of Wild West, isn't it? The technology is way ahead of people's ability to think about how it should be regulated.
But this is the thing. Look, if I sat here now and gave the information about how to make a bomb, I would be taken off air within seconds.
Well,
I'd never be allowed back on air. We would be fined by Ofcom. There would be absolutely, and yet we seem to think that the radio, TV, and newspapers should operate under the law, but internet companies, as you say, are the Wild West.
Well, yes. I mean, the reality is policing it. And it's a little easy to police, I suppose, if you're focusing upon the companies. In fact,
and that's just sheer scale.
Well,
really?
Absolutely, and also where they're operating from and how these things slip through the net, quite literally. Although a policy think tank, Policy Exchange, who no doubt Gerard knows, it's a right-wing think tank, suggested the UK public would support new laws criminalising reading content that glorifies terror.
Well, in the same way that we criminalise looking at images of abuse of sexual abuse of children.
Well, in the same way, for instance, taking the analogy of Earther, we criminalise the taking of drugs. If you do the act, you don't have to produce the drug, but if you take it, then it's a criminal offence. So these are interesting developments. I'll just go back to the red Chinese point, or the Chinese or whatever colour point.
Chinese Communist Party.
Well, yeah, it's easy for them to actually police and take people down, because everyone that disagrees with them is supposed to be a dissident.
Yeah.
In this country, we have a little more, we should say, a democratic approach to things.
No,
Yes.
my point was that they can do it. So technically, why can't we do things that we decide are, or that the law has decided the internet companies should be taking down?
I think there needs to be a common policy, and I think if there is a common policy and a common approach, well, we can work together on that. I think it's a matter of talking.
I think what's far more insidious is what they're using this information for that we don't know about. I mean, Google's in league with the CIA.
Hello.
And, I mean, they sell them this information. They have access to all this information. I mean, if you imagine this kind of information base in the hands of someone like Mao Zedong, Stalin or Hitler, and yet we are allowing our governments to have it. They're OK at the moment. They're not oppressing us. But if they decided they wanted to, we'd be in a very difficult situation.
I'm a legal advisor to Big Brother watch. I think we'd have Gerard as our patron.
Right.
You'd be surprised I'm not as right-wing as you think.
It's a bit of a loving going
They're going to go for lunch with each other afterwards. No, we're going to talk about a rather more serious issue next, and that is a report that suggests that 1 in 4 teenage girls has depression. An extraordinary number, 1 in 10 teenage boys, and this is all to do with questions being actually asked of teenagers and asked of parents, and they're basically saying that parents seem to be less worried about their daughters than they should be. But we talked about this on my show earlier the weekend, and Gerard, one of my concerns about this is that I do worry that we are medicalising and labelling an awful lot of what is normal teenage worries about, boys, your appearance, life, what kind of adult are you going to be? Where's life taking you? And the idea that a quarter of young girls have some sign of anxiety or depression suggests to me that perhaps we're defining these things in a different way from the way we did when I was that age.
Well, maybe, but I mean, it's more widespread amongst teenage boys, and you have a higher incidence of suicide in young men than you do any other group. So I think there is a problem. I mean, you're quite right. I think that there are a lot of drama is made of things where it could be a more positive approach to people's lives would be more beneficial than medicalising it. But on the other hand, I think there is a real problem, and I do think people are under more pressure than they were when I was young, because there wasn't. You didn't think about buying a house. It wasn't something you worried about because you knew you could get a job and probably you'd buy a house.
I don't remember that even being something I ever considered as something I would ever do or not do.
But I
it
think
just wasn't on the agenda.
What's on young people's minds now as they become teenagers and studying to go to university is the prospect of enormous debt, the prospect that they're not going to find a well-paid job, the prospect that they are not going to be able to buy a house or find somewhere to live at a reasonable cost. And I think there's more
telling me this is worse than in the
people.
1970s? Are you kidding me?
No. I think that the world's changed. It's different, and maybe people are more aware of all these things. People got on with their lives a bit more. Now, because of social media and everything, they're more aware of all of these things going on.
Maps comparing. And I do think, for me, I have to say, John...
It's certainly as bad as the 30s.
Yeah, the social media has a lot to answer for it, and this, especially with the girls, this constant comparison on what their bodies are supposed to look like, the selfie taking, this constant narcissistic obsession with themselves. Unless all of my friends and all of my classmates were just covering this up all the time, I just don't believe that a quarter of us were depressed.
I think this is a wider issue as well. We're becoming more and more aware of mental health issues, and I think a number of people, including, I have to say, Prince Harry is getting, and credit to him, involved in this issue in broadcasting.
Yeah, but he's someone who lost his mother.
About mental health.
This isn't about someone who just thinks that, there may be a stone overweight and they're getting depressed
again, there needs to be balance. I mean, there are certain signs of depression, and I can see, for instance, I'm looking at the list of signs of depression for young people. For instance, feeling anxious or worried, having suicidal thoughts or thoughts of self-harming, feeling hopeless and helpless. These are all points of great concern that could potentially flag mental health. But again, within this list, we also have feeling irritable and intolerant of others.
That's me every day.
Having no motivation or interest in things, and things like that, which, quite honestly, I think a lot of teenagers feel that anyway.
Well, this is the issue, isn't it? Because I'm not being dismissive at all of people with genuine mental health problems, because I think everyone now knows close family and friends who go through this. And I do worry that when we sort of think that, well, everybody's suffering from, or a huge minority of people are suffering from these things, we actually then don't actually focus the resources and our attentions on the people who really need help. I think the
important thing that this brings out, and there are these debates to be had, I think the important thing that this brings out, and it's an important report, an important important observation that young people, if they have these feelings, they should speak about them.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
they shouldn't bottle them up and hide them. And if at the end of the day it's decided this is not depression, well, great. But I think it's good because it encourages people to talk.
Indeed,
about it.
but there's also an element, you don't think, Gerard, that when we walk around, and you were just talking about saying, oh, it's so you've got to buy a house, have you got your job? You know what? We live in one of the richest countries in the world. We have life pretty good. When people worry about, I don't know, women, young women are urged to worry about whether there's a statue in Parliament Square to a woman or the price of the amount of VAT they're spending on their tampons, I've got to say, your life's not that bad.
Can I make another kind of related point? But soap operas. I don't watch them, but whenever I flick through the channel, it's full of people snarling at each other through clenched teeth.
Yes,
and
very
I think
angry.
that probably doesn't do
EastEnders is so depressing at the moment, isn't it?
That probably.
I gave up EastEnders for Lent about 10 years ago.
Kids do watch this kind of stuff, and that would put anyone in a bad
But
mood
again, if you constantly, and survey after survey, if you constantly tell teenagers that their lives are going to be awful, that life is terrible, and they should be miserable, and also that basically anyone who's interesting, I mean, Emma Stone is in the news, the Hollywood actress. There she's been in therapy since she was a primary school.
Julia, you know, when you see grown men standing outside Big Ben and crying because the bell isn't going to go on
Gerard,
and looking depressed.
Were you there, Gerard?
No, I wasn't.
Get a grip.
One of the funniest things I saw was the Ramonas prancing around with their faces painted.
That's okay. Oh my!
That cheered me up no end.
What we're going to work out is how John has got the challenge. He's got to mention the EU when we talk about baby names, which is one of our other topics. We're also going to be talking about cycling law under review after that horrific death. Now, shut up, both of you. We're going to get an update on the travel. I'll throw you both out and you have to cycle home and not get an Uber at this rate. This is Talk Radio. I'll be back. Good afternoon to you. Just 10 minutes to go till midday. This is Talk Radio. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. John Holmes will be here to take you through the afternoon. Yeah, it is Friday afternoon. We are on the home stretch, people, to the weekend. Just two more topics to discuss with my fabulous Friday panel. Gerard Batten, UKIP MEP for London, and John Cooper QC. I'm wondering how they're going to get the EU into both of these. Don't worry, they'll manage it. The cycling law is under review. Dangerous cycling law after that horrific crash in which Kim Briggs, a mother of two, was killed by Charlie Alliston. He was riding a fixed-gear bike, had no front brakes. He had to be convicted under Victorian law of wanton or furious driving because there just wasn't a law for dangerous cycling. Gerard, do you think that we should have a review into cycling law?
I think that definitely. I mean, I go out on the local roads where I live. Last night I went down a road where you can do 40 miles an hour. There's a cyclist, quite usually no lights on the cycle. You can't see them until they get right up close. I haven't seen any cyclists. One I saw last night who's got a light on his hat. Most of them have no lights.
Can't be seen from behind, though.
No. They whiz past you on the pavement at high speed, where I live. So you've only got to deviate an inch or two to either way, and if you're unlucky, you're going to get hit by a bike. I think that they should have to have some kind of proficiency test to go on the road, and they should have insurance, and there should be a dangerous...
The key thing for me is I want licence plates. John Cooper, what do you think?
I remember passing my cycling proficiency test. Do
you remember that?
I've got my certificate on my mantelpiece. No, seriously, I think it's the first thing I ever took. Anyway, going back to the subject, I agree. I mean, there needs to be a law brought up to date about bad cycling. We must, of course, get some perspective here. It's not endemic in the sense of people being killed on the roads by cyclists, but the argument being made at the moment by a number of pro-cyclists that because it doesn't happen that often, there shouldn't be a law against it. It's spurious. It's spurious.
It is very strange.
Because the law...
And it is going to happen more often because we've got more and more cyclists on the road.
The law doesn't work like that. The fact of the matter is it is a potential danger, and indeed the law needs to be brought up to date. Wanton and furious is hardly 21st century language. I mean, what about wanton and furious debate we've had here? That's made a criminal offence.
Somebody might arrest us eventually.
Gerard, I want to know, is there not an EU law, an EU directive covering this? Come on, I brought the EU in for you.
Actually, I don't think there is. I mean, you've given the committee something to do, so to justify turning up and getting their 300 euros a day, they can write a directive on cycling across the European Union. I'm sure somebody will pick the idea up.
I have to say, the cycling on the pavements and through the red lights, one of the biggest issues around my way. But I have to remind myself how lucky I am to live in the sort of leafy part of London where that is the biggest issue. Rather than what's happening in other parts of many cities. I thought Gerard was going to say at least we're saved French people with onions over their bikes and that sort of thing.
You're stereotyping again.
On that note, we're going to identity politics. We're going to talk about the final story of the week, and I've been fascinated by this baby names. I've actually done it twice on the show this week because I'm really fascinated by how parents go about choosing the name for their children. Every single year we get the Office for National Statistics publishing the top 10 10, or indeed they go through the full top 100 most popular names for boys and girls in the previous year. Olivia has finally replaced Amelia as the most popular girl's name, and Oliver for boys. Very similar names, but it is absolutely fascinating that many parents will name their child. They think, oh, I love this name, and I don't know why I love this name, but I really like it. And then they think they've chosen a really individual name, Gerard, and then they discover that actually there's another 5 in their child's class when they arrive at school.
Yes, and I'm expecting in about 9 months' time there to be a surge amongst Remainers of the name Jean-Claude for boys and Europa for girls.
And Guy. A lot of Guys.
Oh, I don't think anybody want to name
that.
Well,
it's definitely been in the news, hasn't there? There are virtually no Nigels being named. Now, Nigel Farage, as a former UKIP leader, of course, has said it's nothing to do with him. But how are they doing for Gerard's?
Well, you see, it pays in politics to have an unusual name, and Gerard is fairly uncommon, so people remember it. So it's quite a good thing.
I know 2 Gerards, including you.
Well,
yes.
I've
I know Gerard
very
Butler.
few.
Oh. From 300. You know.
Do you know him?
Well, I don't know him.
I was about to be impressed.
No, I know of him.
I've been trying to impress everyone all morning with my photo of me with Frank Lampard last night, but I don't know many Franks either. It's funny to say. John, I mean, look, John...
I did one, but he's now called something else.
I mean, John is... when I was a child, you know, girls were called Sarah, boys were called John. Frankly, you turn a penny. Did your parents put any thought? Did they think that if they called you a name like John, it would just be, for want of a better word, John, I mean this nicely, quite common?
Well, do you want the real answer to that question? Well,
God, is it a clean story?
No, I was born premature, and they thought that I was going to die.
John!
No, absolutely. And the midwife or the surgeon said, give him a name so he can have a name before he dies. And my dad's name was John, so my mum said John. You didn't expect that answer, did you?
I did not.
It's the truth. It's the truth.
It's extraordinary.
It's the truth.
So it's a happy day. I would tell you, you're a big strapping lad now.
Thank you, Julia. But you know, you're a married woman, and I was taken for as well. But the problem with that, again, I digress slightly, is that I was given exactly the same name as my father, John Gordon Cooper, because give me a name, as it were, for the headstone. Lovely, isn't it? But then for the rest of my life, particularly when I was at home, it was a major problem with letters coming to the post. Remember those things? Yeah. We used to have letters coming through letterboxes. I was opening my father's. My father said he was accidentally opening mine. But
that's one of the reasons. Now, there's a good excuse for yours, but I just think I've never understood about people who named their child directly after them.
But going back, I mean, look in some of the girls' names. We have Ava and Isabella. My God, we wouldn't have this in Brexit. Ava and Isabella. I mean, Ava, 3,285. Isabella, 2,729.
Got lots of those in my daughter's class. Yeah, but that's the thing. It is interesting how much the names have changed. But also, for me, it's the fact that, I mean, the boys' names often they've been around for years and years and years. Your Harrys, your Jacks, your Georges, very sort of good old British names. But of course, Gerard, I have to bring it back to you. Mohammed.
You can't resist it.
I can't resist it in the top 10.
You were gonna
but of course, actually, if you combine all the different spellings of Mohammed,
Yeah.
it would be higher up the top 10, wouldn't it?
I think, isn't that what they did? Are they only going by one spelling? And is this nationally? Because I'm looking at the briefing, it is nationally. But I mean, what that shows you is the demographic change in the country, the fact that name is now top of the list.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, isn't
well,
it?
it's not top, it's number 8, but all the good for it. It shows diversity within the society we live in.
Right, we're going to leave it there, boys.
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.